Monsanto, evil empire.
This is Schwan at the Monsanto protest in Dam Square, Amsterdam, 25th of May, 2013. Can you believe it? And here we are. We were there. Joey and Schwan. The journey to everywhere continues.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza. No matter how much or how little you watch the news, you always hear snippets of a protest, a demonstration, a march that is happening somewhere in the world. What you just saw at the beginning was a demonstration against the corporation giant Monsanto. I mean, this was only one demonstration that was happening in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Other demonstrations were happening on the same day, at the same time, in more than 250 cities across the world. Civil disobedience has been a part of almost every nation's development and are usually sparked by mass disapproval of the way companies and usually authorities conduct themselves. The American Revolution started in 1775 and it created the United States of America that we know today. The French Revolution, that lasted for 10 years from 1789 until 1799, caused a renaissance and a culture change. That's historically, and there have been many more in the last few centuries, but the biggest we have seen this century is arguably what has been dubbed as the Arab Spring.
On December 17, 2010, a 26-year-old Tunisian street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in front of the governor's office in protest of police and government corruption. People around the Arab world considered Bouazizi a hero for his extreme actions, especially after his death on January 4, 2011, with social media sites like Facebook mobilizing protesters and Twitter spreading the message in spite of web censorship. The unrest caused Tunisian President Ben Ali and his family to flee the country in mid-January. The turbulence quickly extended to other Arab countries. An uprising in Syria began in late January. Bahrain followed suit the next month. The New Year's Day bombing of a Coptic church in Egypt ignited clashes in that country. By the end of January, Tahrir Square and surrounding areas hosted hundreds of thousands of dissenters who were protesting against Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak and his government.
When a Tunisian street vendor set himself on fire to protest government corruption, he started a widespread series of uprisings. That single act triggered the inception and rise of the Arab Spring movement from Tunisia to Libya, Egypt, and beyond. To date, rulers have been forced from power in Tunisia, Egypt, twice even, Libya and Yemen. Civil uprisings has erupted in Bahrain and Syria. Major protests have broken out in Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, and Sudan. And minor protests have occurred in Mauritania, Oman, Saudi, Western Sahara, and Palestine. I mean, protests have been happening all over the world this year, sparked by the Arab Spring in 2011. The protests in Turkey earlier this year, for example. They were initially to contest the urban development plan for Istanbul's Taksim Gezi Park. A sit-in was organized at the park by approximately 50 environmentalists, but because of the manner that the police evicted these sit-in protesters, it sparked mass protests across Istanbul and other cities in Turkey. These then covered not only the park issue, but a wide range of concerns, at the core of which were issues of freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and the government's encroachment on Turkey's secularism. With no centralized leadership beyond the original small organization that organized the environmental protest, there wasn't really anyone to negotiate with. So the protests developed into riots when a group occupying the park was attacked with tear gas and water cannons by the Turkish police. The overall number of protesters involved was reported to be at least 2.5 million, according to the Turkish Interior Ministry, over the 3 weeks from the start of the events. Now, since those protests, a new regulation has come out which will allow Turkish police to detain those who possess the risk of conducting a protest. I mean, it will allow the police to detain a suspect who they deem to be a suspect who may hold a protest And they can hold that person for up to 24 hours without any court decision, whilst also increasing the penalties for resistance to police and damaging public property. But it's not just Turkey. The same happened in Brazil, when authorities put up the price of transport. Although the bus fare increase was the tipping point for demonstrators, the basis for public disenchantment with the policies of the ruling class went far deeper. There was frustration among the general population's disappointment with the inadequate provision of social services in Brazil. And despite Brazil's international recognition in lifting 40 million people out of poverty and into what they call the Nova Class C, with comfortable access to the middle class consumer market, the policies have been the subject of intense political debate. Groups amongst the protesters argue that lifting working people out of poverty was just an electoral strategy and nothing more. Other commonly stated reasons for the protest include high taxes that do not benefit the poor. The average Brazilian citizen is estimated to pay 40.5% of their income in taxes, yet the country still suffers from various social and infrastructural problems such as poorly functioning health services, a low education rate, inadequate welfare benefits, and a growing but still low rate of employment. And this all happened during the 2013 Confederations Cup, giving it the worldwide attention. Similar protests have happened in Europe, with the euro crisis in several countries such as Germany and Spain and Greece due to the financial failings of supporting the European currency, and this leading to growing discontent with many citizens of a lot of the European countries, as these citizens started calling on their governments for their countries to leave the EU. But as demonstrations and protests increasingly become more violent, the police service of many of these countries very quickly crack down on any type of dissent, even if it's peaceful. Have a look at the following clip of police action against demonstrators in Spain. Now, even in Russia, just before Putin's appointment, there were demonstrations. The Russians were not too happy with the current situation and did not think that Putin was the man for the job. Now, that might have changed since then, but still. Look, there are many other reasons for all of these protests. I get that. But the reason why I wanted to discuss this was because I was wondering, where do the Somalis fit into this? When was the last time you remember such large-scale protests organized by Somalis anywhere in the world? I mean, have a look at a few organized over the past few years.
Hundreds of UK Somalis gathered outside Lancaster House to demonstrate against the political instability and over 2 decades of hopelessness in Somali. They marched, held their placards high and sang songs of solidarity in hope that their plea will be heard by the international leaders at the London Somali Conference 2012.
So why are you guys here today? We're here to have...
On the streets of Seattle, a protest unfolds over the future of Ethiopia.
We need our freedom and we need it now.
They are trying to send a message to members of Ethiopia's government who are holding a meeting inside Seattle Center's exhibition hall.
They're not in the right side of history.
The protesters allege years of human rights violations.
Every ethnicity in Ethiopia are telling these people to go. It is time for them to go.
Now, this is usually how our demonstrations look like. quite small in comparison to all the other protests we see around the world. And they don't particularly get the media attention they need. Although perhaps the Somali media could play a bigger part in that. Is it that the issues that Somalis protest about that causes low turnouts? I mean, in my opinion, the issues are the same, if not even greater, as they've been escalating for decades now. We have had a few successful demonstrations though. I mean, here you'll see one in Sweden against Meles Zenawi's treatment of Somalis in the Ogaden, and a clip of Somalis protesting against the forced resignation of former Prime Minister Farmaajo. Let's not forget about some of the protests that were happening to stop the xenophobic killing of Somalis in South Africa. They seem to have been better organized. But also, people's emotions were valid in the masses. So what causes us to not be able to take part of protests and demonstrations? Is it laziness? Is it that we are not willing to leave our jobs, that we won't refuse to pay rent, to pay our taxes, or to take any other form of civil disobedience? To be honest, we as a community, as a nation like many others, have become too comfortable. Many of us find sharing YouTube videos our revolutionary act of the day, and then carry on with our usual lives. We have luxury and privilege, and that is what causes us to be sedated against any form of revolution. What we really need is a revolution of the mind. We need to revolutionize our way of thinking, because once we change our mindsets, my brothers and sisters, only then can we change the way we do things. Our community, as a society, has to embrace all the different cultural, religious and historical values we possess, as well as the influence of other cultures from across the world, especially with those of us who have spent the majority of their lives in the Western or Eastern countries. I don't know. Perhaps it's a singular act that we need. Perhaps it's a particular person who gives inspirational speeches and rallies the people's support behind them that will cause us to act. It's not necessarily about the demonstrations, but what it shows is that we rarely are unified in any action we as Somalis do or make. And that's the real problem here. Let's change the way we think so we can change the way we act. Inshallah. I'll catch you after the break. Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza. The UK, under the new coalition government that came in a few years ago, has made a lot of changes when it comes to immigration. In July this year, there was public outrage to a new government scheme to drive a van through London boroughs with the message, "Go home, or you'll be picked up and deported." The government sent out vans to drive through 6 boroughs with adverts calling on illegal immigrants to leave. Now, Immigration Minister Mark Harper said the scheme was trying to get the message out that it was better for illegal immigrants and taxpayers if these illegal immigrants go home voluntarily. Here's the response of Vince Cable to this tactic.
What about this van we've been talking about, which is going around 6 boroughs with the message, go home or face arrest for people who are here illegally? Is that racist?
I wouldn't use that word, but as Trevor Phillips said, I think it's stupid. I mean, the whole idea that illegal immigrants have got a sophisticated grasp of English, read at a distance, and I think it is offensive. I mean, it is designed, apparently, to sort of create a sense of fear in the British population that we have a vast problem of illegal immigration. We have a problem, but it's not a vast one. And it's got to be dealt with in a measured way, dealing with the underlying causes, and that's why I said we've got to crack down on employers who are abusing both low pay and immigration.
There's just one more question on it. It is your government that's done it.
Well,
have you had a row about it or not?
I think there has been a row by the people who are directly involved. I certainly wasn't consulted, and I know my other Lib Dem colleagues haven't been.
But the immigration policy of the current UK government touches many different communities. Hundreds of workers and business owners in London's Chinatown temporarily closed up shop and took to the streets, protesting particular raids by the UK Border Agency. I mean, since July, the Border Agency has reportedly carried out, well, so far anyway, 13 such raids, which business owners are saying that they're just fishing for immigrants in these countries illegally. In a separate protest, the Southall Black Sisters protested UK immigration policy and the Go Home advertising campaign on the vans. The protests come amid debate over the immigration bill before Parliament, which Home Secretary Theresa May says is aimed at making it harder for people who are planning to illegally stay here. There was also quite a big political backlash to the campaign itself, but that didn't stop the Conservatives from pushing on and trying something new. I mean, after the vans, they tried texting those they believed were illegal immigrants. Over 140 complaints have been received after 40,000 people suspected of being illegal immigrants were sent messages by private contractor Capital. Some of the recipients were British citizens. Now, it came as Immigration Minister Mark Harper said the Go Home vans could still be rolled out across the country despite being banned for providing false information by the Advertising Standards Authority. Now, we have Lib Dem MP Sarah Tether being interviewed on her thoughts about this.
Earlier I spoke to the Liberal Democrat MP and former government minister Sarah Tether. It's her first interview since announcing she's stepping down from the Commons at the next election, partly because she no longer feels that her party fights for liberal values on immigration. Well, I started by asking her what she makes of the new immigration bill.
I'm not convinced that the government has defined the problem that they're trying to tackle, and many of these measures, it seems to me, will make the situation worse. It will create division between people, and particularly for those who have come to this country fleeing persecution and war, who arrive with fear, to create more fear, yet more fear for them, for no obvious benefit to the country.
Since then, Theresa May has made the decision to stop going ahead with the ads on the vans. But what she has come out with, and in accordance with the Conservative policy, is the latest version of the immigration bill. Her move came as David Cameron, the UK's Prime Minister, gave the strongest signal yet that the Conservatives are ready to quit the meddling European Court of Human Rights. The Prime Minister said he would do whatever it takes to ensure Britain can throw out people who pose a threat to the country and have no right to be here. The court's interpretation of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is enshrined in British law in the Human Rights Act, and stops the UK from throwing people out of the country that are refugees or asylum seekers quite quickly, has been condemned by many Conservative MPs. They just don't like it. Asked if the party is considering complete withdrawal, the Prime Minister said, "It may be that this is where we end up." Here's a clip of Theresa May explaining the immigration bill a little more.
If leaving the European Convention is what it takes to fix our human rights laws, that is what we should do. Now, those are issues for the general election, when Labour and the Lib Dems will have to explain why they value the rights of terrorists and criminals more than the rights of the rest of us. In the meantime, we need to do all we can now to limit the damage. The government will soon publish the immigration bill, which will make it easier to get rid of people with no right to be here. First, we're going to cut the number of appeal rights. At the moment, the system is like a never-ending game of snakes and ladders, with almost 70,000 appeals heard every year. The winners, foreign criminals and immigration lawyers, while the losers are the victims of these crimes and the public. So we're going to cut the number of appeal rights from 17 to 4, and in doing so, cut the total number of appeals by more than half. Last year, human rights were cited in almost 10,000 immigration appeal cases. So the second thing we will do is extend the number of non-suspensive appeals. That means that where there is where there is no risk of serious and irreversible harm, we should deport foreign criminals first and hear their appeals later. And third, the immigration bill will sort out the abuse of Article 8, the right to a family life, once and for all. This is used by thousands of people to stay in Britain every year. The trouble is, while the European Convention makes clear that a right to a family life is not absolute, judges often treat it as an unqualified right. That's why I published new immigration rules, stating that foreign criminals and illegal immigrants should ordinarily be deported despite their claim to a family life. Those rules were debated in the House of Commons, and they were approved unanimously. But some judges chose to ignore Parliament and go on putting the law on the side of foreign criminals instead of the public. So I am sending a very clear message to those judges. Parliament wants the law on the people's side. The public wants the law on the people's side, and Conservatives in government will put the law on the people's side once and for all.
So, the government wants to reduce net migration. They want to clamp down on illegal immigration and benefit claims. But there are some concerning things in this immigration bill, especially the part where banks have to check immigrants' legal status before offering accounts. Some temporary migrants, such as students who are here legally, will pay a £200 a year levy towards the cost of NHS services. And registrars will have to inform the Home Office of planned weddings between UK citizens and those from outside Europe to cut down on what they call sham marriages. But what is really concerning as well is that it compels landlords to check whether tenants are in the UK illegally, with those failing to do so facing large fines. Now, BBC's Inside Out London did an investigative piece where they found out that many letting agents do not let properties to black tenants at the request of their clients, the landlords. It's crazy, right? Landlords and letting agents are already looking at our skin color to check if they will let us rent a property. But because of this bill, this will almost become legal. It encourages such behavior. Also, those at risk of being deported can be deported even before the appeal is known. And what they've also changed is, currently the maximum number of appeals is 17, but they've changed it to 4. And this isn't the first immigration bill. Yes, there have been some before here, and they've made changes to the language tests or, longer periods of naturalization through marriage. But still, critics insist that more needs to be done to deter illegal immigrants and the exploitation of benefits and services. Now make sure to look out for this immigration bill, as this is probably going to pass the House of Commons and might even pass the House of Lords, after which it will become law. And it affects all types of migrants, not just illegal immigrants. It affects even those that are just citizens. In our community, I mean, we're Somali, we're black, we're Muslim. It means that it will be harder for our parents and ourselves, as the younger generation, to get properties we can rent because of the colour of our skin. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching The Briefing Room. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza. Have a good evening.